Somebody with $3 million invested and somebody with 100,000 are not doing the same activity? They may own the identical fund, with the identical monthly transfer going out on the first of the month. But what is actually happening inside those two accounts is so different that calling both of them investing is misleading. One number shows why, and it is not the balance. Put $1,000 a month into the market, which is $12,000 a year. At 100,000 invested, the market hands you about $7,000 a year. You are putting in 12. You are still the main engine, and the market is helping. At $1,000,000 invested, the market hands you $70,000 a year. You are still putting in 12. The market is now contributing almost 6 times what you are. At $3,000,000, the market hands you $210,000 a year. 17.5 times your contribution, one person, one level of discipline, and the identical $12,000 a year going in. And somewhere between those numbers, your role changed from being the source of the money to being almost irrelevant to it. That transition is what this video is about. Knowing which side of it you are standing on changes what you should actually be doing with your money. And most people have never checked. I'm Tom. This channel is about real personal finance, the kind that works for normal people, instead of the kind that sells you something. No motivational fluff, no fantasy returns, no get rich quick. Just what the math actually does over time. If that is what you want, hit subscribe. Before the levels, one thing about the 7% I keep using. That is roughly what American stocks have returned over the long run after subtracting inflation. According to the historical data kept by NYU Stern, it is what your money gains in actual buying power, and every figure in this video uses it. It is also an average across good years and terrible ones, not a schedule. Roughly 1 year in 4 has finished lower, and every level below assumes you sat through those. Now the levels, and I am going to define them by who is doing the work rather than by what the balance can buy. $100,000. The market gives you about $7,000 a year at this level, which works out to $583 a month. That is a phone bill and a tank of gas. Against your $12,000 of contributions, the market is supplying about 60% of what you are. You are still carrying this thing. Here is what that means practically, and it is the most important thing at this level. If you stopped contributing tomorrow and never added another dollar, that $100,000 becomes about $387,000 in 20 years. That is real, and it is not a retirement. So at this level, your contribution is not optional, and it is nothing like a rounding error. It is the difference between the outcome you want and one that falls well short, which tells you where your attention belongs. Fund selection, allocation debates, and tax optimization all matter a little. The amount going in matters enormously more, and it will keep being true until roughly the next level. There is also a psychological trap here that catches people, and it is the opposite of what you would expect. At 100,000, a 15% market move is $15,000. That is more than an entire year of your contributions disappearing or appearing in a few weeks. So this is the first level where the market can visibly outrun your effort in a bad month. It is also where a lot of people conclude that saving is pointless because the market undoes it anyway. That conclusion is wrong, and the reason it is wrong is that the market's move is temporary and your contribution is permanent. The $15,000 comes back. The $12,000 you did not contribute never does. $250,000. The market now gives you about $17,500 a year. $1,458 a month, which covers groceries for most households. For the first time, the market is contributing more than you are, about 1.5 times more. This is the handover, and it is worth being precise about where it happens, because it is not a fixed number. The crossover point is your annual contribution divided by your return. At 7%, that is your annual contribution times about 14. Somebody contributing $12,000 a year crosses over at about $171,000. Somebody contributing $6,000 crosses at $86,000. Somebody contributing $36,000 does not cross until $514,000. So the level where the market takes over is not a dollar figure that applies to everybody. It is 14 times whatever you are putting in. What changes at this level is subtle but real. Your contributions are still meaningful and they are no longer the main story. The balance would keep growing without you now, just more slowly than you want. Stop contributing at $250,000 and you still have $967,000 in 20 years. Without adding another dollar. That is a genuine retirement for a household with modest expenses and Social Security behind it. which means this is the first level where continuing at full speed becomes a choice rather than a requirement. That distinction is worth noticing when you reach it because nothing announces it. $500,000. The market gives you $35,000 a year. $2,900 a month? Which for a lot of households is close to a full month of living expenses produced by money nobody touched. Your $12,000 is now about a third of what the market is providing. Stop contributing entirely and you reach $1.9 million in 20 years. That is the number that changes how people at this level should think. You could stop, and the outcome would still be substantial, which introduces a question that does not exist at lower levels. Not can I afford to retire, but what am I still contributing for? There are good answers to that. Retiring earlier, a larger cushion against a bad decade, money for children or grandchildren, are simply wanting more than a modest retirement. There are also bad answers, and the most common one is that you never stop to ask. The contribution rate was set 15 years ago when it was the only thing driving the outcome. It has been running on momentum ever since. At this level, the contribution deserves a decision rather than a habit, and most people have never made one. There is a second thing worth naming here. At $500,000, an ordinary 15% market swing is $75,000, which is more than 6 years of your contributions. So the emotional weight of the account has shifted completely. You will feel market movements far more than you feel your own saving. That is when people start checking the balance more often than is good for them. $1 million. The market gives you $70,000 a year, $5,800 a month, which for a great many households is more than they actually spend. Your $12,000 of contributions is now about 17% of what the market supplies. This is the level where a specific thing becomes true, and it surprises people. Your contributions have become noise. A 15% market move at $1 million is $150,000. That is 12.5 years of contributions arriving or disappearing inside a few months. Which means anything you do with the contribution now is small compared to things you do not control. Doubling your saving rate would add $12,000 a year against a market that routinely moves $150,000. I made a whole video about this specific threshold. The short version is that past a certain balance, extra saving stops being the lever it used to be. So what does matter at $1 million? 3 things, and none of them is the contribution. The first is your allocation, meaning how much of the balance sits in stocks versus bonds. That decision now determines whether the market gives you $70,000 a year or $35,000. The second is cost. A 1% fee at $1 million is $10,000 a year, which is nearly as much as your entire contribution. At $100,000, that same fee was $1,000 and easy to ignore. The third is tax location, which is where these dollars sit. $1 million in a pre-tax account is not $1 million of spendable money. The decisions that fix that have a window, and the window closes. $2 million. The market gives you $140,000 a year, $11,600 a month, and that figure is already after inflation has been taken out. At this point, your annual contribution equals about 1 month of what the market provides. Stop contributing and you reach $7.7 million in 20 years without adding anything. The honest thing to say about this level is that the accumulation question is finished. Whatever happens from here is determined by the return, the tax treatment, and how much you spend. Your ability to save is no longer part of the equation, which changes what a good decision even looks like at this level. At $100,000, a good decision was contributing more. At $2 million, a good decision is refraining from something damaging. That is a genuinely harder skill, because it produces no evidence that you did anything. Nobody congratulates you for the crash you did not sell into. It means holding through a decline. It means refusing to hand a percentage point to somebody for fund selection. And it means declining the concentrated bet that the balance now feels big enough to absorb. The downside risk has become larger than the upside opportunity, and that is a different game with different rules. $3 million and above. The market gives you $210,000 a year, $17,500 a month, arriving without anybody doing anything. Your $12,000 annual contribution is now about 5% of 1 year's growth. It has become a rounding error in your own financial life. An ordinary 15% market move at this level is $450,000, which is 37 years of contributions. So the honest description of this level is that you are no longer investing in any meaningful sense. You are a custodian of a machine that runs itself, and your job has changed from building to not breaking. The problems change too, and they are almost entirely tax in structure, required withdrawals from pre-tax accounts, estate planning, whether the allocation still matches a situation that no longer requires growth. None of those are the problems you had at 100,000, and the habits that got you here are not the ones that matter now. One pattern in how you move between these levels explains why the higher ones arrive faster than people expect. If you stop contributing entirely, the time from each level to the next one shrinks. 100,000 takes about 13.5 years to become 250,000 on its own. 250,000 takes about 10 years to become 500. 500,000 takes the same 10 years to become a million, and a million takes 10 to become 2. The steps stop getting longer, even though the dollar gaps between them keep doubling. That is compounding stated as a schedule. A percentage applied to a bigger base covers a bigger distance in the same amount of time. Now let me connect the levels because the pattern across them is the actual lesson. At every level, ask one question. What percentage of this year's growth is my contribution? At 100,000, it is 170%. You are the engine. At 250,000, it is 69%. Shared. At 500,000, 34%. The market leads. At a million, 17%. You are a passenger. At 3 million, under 6%. You are cargo. I want to be careful with that last word because it is not an insult. Being cargo is the objective of the entire exercise. Nobody sets out to remain the engine forever. That single ratio tells you where your attention should go better than any rule of thumb about age or balance. When your contribution is the majority of growth, optimize the contribution. When it is a minority, optimize everything else, because everything else has become larger than you are. There is one comparison that makes this whole scale usable, and it gives you a specific number to check yourself against. At every level, ask which is worth more, doubling your contribution or cutting 1 percentage point of fees. At $100,000, doubling the contribution adds $12,000 a year. Cutting a 1% fee adds $1,000. The contribution wins by 12 to 1. At 500,000, doubling adds 12,000 and the fee cut adds 5. The contribution still wins, but only by about 2 to 1. At a million, doubling adds 12,000 and the fee cut adds 10. They are nearly level. Above about 1.2 million, the fee cut wins, and it keeps winning by a widening margin. At 3 million, cutting 1% is worth 30,000 a year, which is 2.5 times what doubling your saving would do. So there is a specific balance where the most valuable financial action in your life stops being save more and becomes pay less. For most people, it sits somewhere around $1 million, and almost nobody notices when they cross it. Now the honest limits, and there are 4. The first is that I have used $1,000 a month throughout to keep the comparison clean. Your ratio depends entirely on what you actually contribute. Somebody putting in $3,000 a month sits at a completely different point on this scale, at the identical balance. Run your own version, take your balance, multiply it by 7%, and divide your annual contribution by that figure. Wherever it lands is your actual level, regardless of what the balance says. The second is that these levels describe accumulation only. Everything reverses when you start withdrawing. The same volatility that is harmless while you are buying becomes the largest risk in your plan while you are selling. I have made a full video on that mechanism. The third is that 7% is a long-run average and no individual decade is obliged to deliver it. I ran every 10-year stretch in the last century of American returns. 4 of 91 finished negative and 9 came in under 3% a year. If one of those lands on you, your level does not advance on schedule, and nothing about your contribution rate changes that. There is a version of this scale that runs the other way, and it is worth seeing. A decade that delivers nothing costs you more at every level, and the amounts get uncomfortable. At 100,000, a dead decade costs about $97,000 of growth you did not get. At 500,000, 484,000. At a million, 967,000. At 3 million, roughly 2.9 million. So the amount at risk in a bad market grows at exactly the rate your upside does, which is another way of saying the same thing this whole video has been saying. At the higher levels, the things you do not control are far larger than the things you do. The fourth is that balance is not the same as security. Somebody at 2 million with high fixed costs and no other income can be less secure than a household at 500,000, especially one with a paid-off house and a pension behind it. This video ranks compounding, not safety. So here is what to take from this. The advice that is correct at one level is frequently wrong at another, and most financial content never tells you which level it was written for. Save more is excellent advice at 100,000 and close to irrelevant at 2 million, and nobody updates the advice when you cross over. Watch your fees is a small point at 100,000 and a $10,000 a year point at $1 million. Do not panic sell matters at every level, and it matters most where the dollar amounts are large enough to genuinely frighten you. Find your ratio and then take the advice written for your level rather than the advice written for somebody else's. The arithmetic is one line. Multiply your balance by 7%, then divide your annual contribution by that number. Above 1, you are the engine and the contribution is where your effort belongs. Below 1, the market is the engine, and your job is to stop interfering with it and to make sure nobody is skimming from it. Everything else in this video is a footnote to that single ratio. If this was worth your time, hit subscribe. I will see you in the next one.